Everyone to Daf Yomi, 1 week at a time, Masechet Gittin. Today is our 9th lesson, and we're getting towards the end of this Masechet, but not yet. Today's Daf we're going to be doing Daf 58 through 64, and we are going to be finishing the stories. If you remember last week, we were in the middle of discussing the stories of the destruction of the temple. So we're going to finish up those stories today, and then we're going to get back to more technical topics of get that we discussed at the beginning of the Masechet. So Daf 58 continues discussing the Romans and the Jews, talks about this stone, which is called Paz. We actually have someone here in the neighborhood whose last name is Paz, but Paz is this beautiful stone that was given to the Romans, and the Gemara says that the Jews were more beautiful than these stones, right? Again, this idea of the relationship between the Romans and the Jews. And the Gemara continues with a terrible story about Beitar. Beitar is a city south of Jerusalem. It's actually about a 15-minute drive from where Zohar and I live in Gush Etzion. So it's a city. It was a very large Torah city. It is now as well. And in those days, it was destroyed after the temple was destroyed. And there's a terrible story that the Gemara describes that there were 400 shuls in Beitar, and there were 400 children who learned in each one of these shuls, and the Romans killed all of them. It's very vivid. I actually think it's interesting. Of course, we mentioned this last week that we're learning this during the 3 weeks and now the 9 days. Today is Rosh Chodesh and the beginning of the 9 days of the month of Av, where we are supposed to be thinking about the tragedies of the first and temple destruction. So I think it's very timely that these stories are in our this week's daf. There's a story about Rabbi Yoshua ben Chanina that went to Rome. Again, it's interesting to understand that in the time of the Mishnah and early Gemara, that it is during the time of the temple period, around the time of the destruction, and you have Jews going back and forth from Israel to Rome. So here we have a story that Rabbi Yoshua ben Chanina went to Rome and heard about a Jewish boy in prison. Again, we heard of stories of the kids being taken to Rome, and he saw that this boy was very learned, and he redeemed him from jail, and it cost a lot of money, and in the end he became a very famous rabbi. So that is, I guess, a positive story. Another story that the children of another sage, a boy and a girl, were captured and they were sold to 2 different masters, and they were known to be so beautiful. So the masters said, oh, let's get them together and make beautiful children. So they locked them up and they told them to have relations, and they couldn't see who it was. But in the morning, they didn't have relations. And in the morning, they realized that they were actually brother and sister. And they actually die from the torment or the devastation of their capture. And there are more stories of rape and torture of the Jews. And now we are going to move on. So those of you who want to, hear more terrible stories, look at Daf 58. And now we're going to go back to buying and selling, back to Masechet Gittin. So Daf 58 tells us that one needs a formal act of acquisition, right? In Hebrew, it's called a kinyan. Kinyan means a formal act of acquisition. In order to buy a field, one of those acts of acquisition is something called chazakah, right? From the word chazak, strength. But a chazaka is something that happens 3 times. In the sense of a field, it means that if you plow a field, if you work a field for 3 years and the owner of the field, the previous owner of the field, knew about it and he didn't say anything, at the end of 3 years, it proves that you are the owner, right? Because otherwise, why wouldn't the owner come, right? After 3 years, he can't say that it's his field, or if you have a document, or if there's like a responsibility for that property. So that is the official way of acquiring a field. Let's say if you suspected it of being acquired due to pressure, so then it's not valid. And from here, we're going to talk about this case called sikrikon. Sikrikon was basically a person who took land by force. And the question is, right, if someone takes the land by force, you really didn't mean to give it up, and therefore it's not really his. So the case here is that if a person bought land from the sikrikon, right, from someone who coerced you to give it to him, and then used it for 3 years, and the original owner didn't protest, then he can sell it to another person, meaning he didn't come by and say, no, this is mine. And he can't say, pay me this money because that first guy, he just took it from me. So you don't have the right to just take it. So here we have a case that the court can plead for the second owner like an inheritor, and he can't be held responsible for what the first person did or didn't do. The first owner can make this claim. He can make his own claim, but after the 3 years, he cannot. So here's the idea. If an idolater, right, a non-Jew, seizes land to repay a loan or for no reason, right? So then the law of sikrikon doesn't apply. If you buy the land after 12 months, you don't need to return it to the original owner, meaning the idea is that if you gave it over with full knowledge or full acceptance that you're giving over the land, so then it's as if that person acquired it. You can't go back and say, he forced me. But if not, so here the Gemara explains, in Bavel, they didn't steal land for no reason, right? If they did, then they would make a claim in court and it would be resolved. Therefore, you can't claim outside of court that it's your land, meaning you have to go through the proper channels. So if a person buys land, again, from this sikrikon, from someone who took it, so then he has to give a quarter of the money or of the land to the original owner, meaning the idea is, I'm buying this land, you didn't really want to give it up, so I'm going to give you some money in kind of balance to balance out this land. Now, the original owner can choose if he wants money or if he wants land, but the idea is that he gets this quarter value. Daf 59 tells us that it discusses how the courts worked, that when they were passing judgment in a court about a financial issue, so then they would start with the greatest person on the greatest judge and then go down. But for capital cases, they would start with the lesser judge and then work their way up, right? The idea is that they didn't want people to be influenced in their judgment. So they would be, right, if the greatest person went first, so then you're like, oh, he's so smart, I don't want to contradict him. And it makes a difference if we're talking about financial issues or capital issues. From here, since we're talking about great judges, the Gemara talks about Moshe Rabbeinu and Rebbe. Remember, Rebbe is Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi. And the Gemara tells us that only Moshe and Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi were the greatest in Torah scholars and the greatest leaders in all the generations between the two of them. And then they give other people who were great leaders who were in different generations, right? Shmuel and Shaul, Yoshua and Elazar, right? We have people who work together where there's two great leaders. But for Moshe and for Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, it was just them. There wasn't someone else with them. Right from Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, the next greatest person is Rav Ashi, which is much later on. Okay, let's go to the next Mishnah on Daf 59. The Mishnah tells us that a cheresh, a deaf mute, can make signals and others can make signals to him, and then that would be a valid sale. Again, when we're talking about movable objects, right? We're going to make a distinction between movable objects. In the Gemara, it's called metaltalin because they're movable. Litaltel means to move from one place to another. So that is fine, as opposed to karka, which is land. You're going to need a greater buying power in order to sell land. So a deaf mute can somehow communicate, and that is a valid sale. You can also mouth things, but that is less valid. For minors, so then they can make their transactions are valid. The question is when, and we'll see more of this today. So the Gemara says that everyone agrees that you can use gestures for Gittin, right, for divorce, but not to mouth words, right? I guess the idea is, which is interesting because this is obviously before sign language, but here it seems that signing is more powerful than mouthing words, than lip reading, right? Because we're not sure that they really understand. Minors, so the question is, what is a minor? Maybe from 6 or 7, or from 7 or 8, or from 9 to 10. It depends how sharp the kids are. And if it's to help them earn a living, right? If they were very poor and they had no one to support them, so then that's where you can let them sell things. But if it's not to help them support them, so no. Okay. The next Mishnah, remember we were talking about the concept of Darchei Shalom, right? We started with Tikkun Olam, right? Making the world a better place. Now we have Darchei Shalom, to make peace among the people. So we're going to have different things that make peace among the people. What are these decrees? The first is that a Kohen, a priest, gets the first Aliya in shul, right? So if you are familiar, on Shabbat and during the week, we read from the Torah portion. The first Aliya, we call up a Kohen. The second Aliya, we call up a Levi. And then Yisrael is for 3 and on. If there is no Kohen, the Gemara is going to explain what happens. So the Kohen gets the first Aliyah. This keeps the peace, right? There's specific order. We don't have to be concerned about people's honor. Everybody knows their place. The next thing is, if you remember Masechet Eruvin, we used to put an Eruv in a house. We would put some food in a specific house, and that would combine all the houses together. So this Mishnah tells us that you always put the food, the Eruv, in the same house. The next is about irrigating fields. Like, let's say there's a water canal from a river, and it had like tributaries, like canals that would go and irrigate the field. So every person would build like a reservoir off of this water canal. So the question is, who fills up their water first? So the Mishnah tells us that the closest to the river, right, the first one, fills up their reservoir first, and then the second, and then the third. The next decree is that it's considered stealing if you take an animal from a trap. Even though, again, you haven't necessarily acquired the animal yet because it's out in the forest, but if it's in a trap, then the owner acquires it, even though technically they don't, but the owner acquires it. And if you take it from the owner, so then it's stealing. If you take something found by a deaf mute, a cheresh, a shoteh, someone who's insane, and a minor, right? If you take something from any one of these people, it's considered stealing, even though technically it's not considered stealing, right? Again, you need, right, this group of people, cheresh, shoteh, and katan, these three people are a classification of people that don't have da'at. They don't have mental capacity like an adult, and therefore what they acquire isn't really acquired. So technically it wouldn't be stealing if you take from them, but the Mishnah tells us because of Darchei Shalom, in order to make peace, right? Don't steal from a kid, right? Not nice. Okay. Also, you cannot take the olives that fall from a tree when a poor person is gathering the olives at the top of the tree. So whatever falls down, even though the poor person didn't acquire it yet, he's trying to acquire it. So don't stand underneath the tree and take away the food that he's trying to collect. If you do, it is considered stealing. And the last thing of this Mishnah is don't protest if poor non-Jews come and collect from your field. Remember, we've seen this before. There are three things that one does in their field to leave things for the poor. The corners of the field called pe'ah, leket, and shekecha, things that fall or things that you forget in the field. It's meant for Jewish poor people. However, if non-Jewish poor people come and take it, we do not say anything, meaning we let them take it. Okay, the Gemara on Daf 59 explains. Let's go to the first thing. We learn that the Kohen comes first based on certain verses. So again, it seems that it's biblical that they should go first. And we're talking about sharing food. Here the Gemara talks about, let's say two people are sharing food, so then you have to wait for each other in order, let's say somebody drinks, so you wait so that you're eating at the same time, right? But for three people you don't have to wait. And since we're talking about a meal, right? So the let's say the host of the meal could give honor to whoever he wants, right? So in order to make the blessing on the cup at the end of the meal, to leave the birkat hamazon, the grace after meals. But in shul, you can't give away. Right, if let's say you're a Kohen and they call you up, you can't say, "Oh no, call Yisrael." No. If you're a Kohen, you go up for the first Aliya. This is a way to not have any fighting. However, let's say there's no Levi. Again, we said it's Kohen, Levi, Yisrael. So if there's no Levi, so then the Kohen, the same Kohen comes up again, right? We say Kohen bimkom Levi, a Kohen instead of the Levi. Okay, after a Levi, you give it to a wise person, a Talmid Chacham, and then it gives like an order of the honor that's bestowed on different people throughout the congregation. Since we're talking about reading Torah in the shul, so the Gemara now talks about the Torah scroll. So the Gemara asks, can you read from, here the Gemara calls it a chumash, but a chumash is what we would call, right, one book of the Torah. Here the Gemara means, we know that we have a Torah scroll in the shul. In the Torah scroll are all 5 books of Moshe, right, of Moses, the 5 books. The Gemara now is asking, what if I have only one of those books, right, Breshit? Let's say I have nowadays we don't really have this, but again, this is before the printing press. So let's say I have a Torah scroll of Sefer Breshit. Can I read from that in the shul? So the Gemara says, well, I'm not allowed to read from a Torah scroll that's missing 1 page. So how could I think that I can read from a Torah scroll that's missing, 3/4 right, of the Torah, right? If it only has 1/5. So it's missing 4/5, so maybe that's a way to understand it. And the Gemara says, maybe that's not a good comparison, but either way, it's not respectful to the community to read from this small scroll, right? It seems like you're saying we couldn't afford a large Torah scroll, so we have this teeny tiny one. And the Gemara is trying to say, no, the community has to get together and buy a Torah scroll that's befitting the community. From here, the Gemara talks about reading the Haftorah. If you are familiar, after we read the weekly portion, we read a parallel or similar story, thematically, from the prophets. And this is, we read chapters from all over the prophets. So again, this is before the printing press. Nowadays, most shuls will read from a book, meaning a Tanakh, or a chumash that has, a list of the printed haftarah. But here the Gemara says, can we take a scroll and write down all the haftorahs, meaning in order of, right, how you read it, right? The haftorah for Breshit, the haftorah for Noach, right? Just write them out. And the Gemara says it's not appropriate because, again, you should be reading from one book, right? Let's say if you're reading from Yirmiyahu, from Jeremiah, so you should have a scroll of Jeremiah. Of Yirmiyahu. If you're reading from Yeshayahu, you should have a scroll of Yeshayahu. So there's a machloket here, if you can do this or not. As I mentioned, most shuls have a printed book. When we learned this together as a group this week, so it's interesting. In our community, we have two shuls. So one shul, we read from a Tanakh, meaning something that has all of Nevi'im, so it's complete. But I was just told that the other neighborhood, actually this neighborhood that's closer to me, they actually just purchased scrolls for each of the books of the prophets. And then when someone would be called up, they would have to know how to read out of the scroll. So that is definitely challenging and very interesting. So I know that I've been here when they read in a fast day, they take out a scroll for the Haftorah. So it seems that they're going to be doing that every week now for the Haftorah. So that's just very interesting. Here on Daf 60, there's a discussion on can you write one section of the Torah, let's say for your children to learn? Again, pre-printing press, how do you teach your children Breshit or Noach, right? You don't have a chumash in your house. Do you go to the shul and open up the large Torah scroll, or can you just write out the section for your child? So here, interestingly, the Gemara discusses how was the Torah, the actual Torah, how was it written, right? We know that Moshe wrote the Torah, that God instructed him to write it down. But the question is, did Moshe write down each parsha as it happened? And then he sewed it all together at the end of the 40 years? Or did Moshe learn all of the Torah, and then he remembered it till the end of his life? And at the end of his life, he wrote it all down together, right? So maybe if you say that he wrote it down in sections, that could be a proof that one could write sections of the Torah. And it seems that they bring a proof from Heleni Hamalka. If you remember her, she was very rich, and she dedicated that golden tablet of Sota. If you remember in Masachet Sota, we talked about her, that there was a golden tablet that just had the verses about the Sota. So we see if they can write a few verses, why can't you write a parsha? So the Gemara says, well, maybe we can't learn from that. Maybe it was only written with abbreviations. Maybe it wasn't written fully. So that wouldn't be a proof. Another proof could be that maybe you can start writing it, but let's say you were writing Breshit. So you can write Breshit if you mean to continue, right? The child is going to learn the next parsha, which is Noach. So then you'll continue. That would be okay. The Gemara tells us that there were actually 8 sections of the Torah that were written separately, but the rest was written all at once. And then there's a discussion, are most laws written down and only some of them oral? Right? Again, what's the relationship between the oral Torah and the written Torah? Again, we're learning the oral Torah, Mishnah, Talmud. That's the oral Torah, what we call Torah Shebe'al Peh. The written Torah, that's Chumash. So there's a machloket, what's more, the written words or the oral Torah? If you look at a bookshelf, one would definitely say that the oral Torah is much more than the written Torah, but it is interesting. And fascinatingly, here the Gemara tells us on Daf 60, the written Torah can be written, the oral Torah cannot be written down. One might say, how is it possible that I have books of the oral Torah, right? We're all learning from a Gemara. So that was what was called, what was needed for that time. And because, again, it was started by Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, Rebbe, who we mentioned before. He saw that it was an Eit Ratzon, it was a time where we needed to write down the Torah, and therefore he wrote down the oral Torah. But till his time, that was not the case. Okay, let's get back to the other cases that we had in the Mishnah. Why do we keep the food of the Eruv in the same house all the time? Maybe it's because of the honor, right? We don't want to take away the honor of having an Eruv in your house. Or maybe it's because of suspicion. Oh, why did you take it away from her house and put it in her house? Maybe she was eating from it, right? So we just keep it in the same place. The water canal, again, it seems that there's a machloket if the lower people get to fill up first or the upper people get to fill up first. They weren't sure what the law was, and therefore the rule was Kol de'alim gvar. This is a statement which means whoever is stronger wins. I don't want to argue the Gemara is very wise, but this seems to be very complicated, right? Whoever gets there first wins doesn't seem always very fair, but it seems that the stronger person wins in this argument. And here there are stories of different people who diverted rivers to irrigate their fields, and it's seen as quite negative. Okay, Daf 61, we mentioned the traps, how you can't take the animals from the traps. So it seems that there were different types of traps. If it has like an inside, so then the animal goes in, then it is acquired by the person, and therefore you cannot take. The Gemara says then that's really stealing, and the things that don't have an inside, so then it's not really stealing, but there was a decree that it should be seen as stealing. Okay, we talked about the findings of a deaf mute, and if you take it, it's like stealing. Again, because of Darchei Shalom, it's not very nice, and we want people to be nice. Again, I think very fitting for the 9 days if we're talking about the reason, right? The reason that the temple was destroyed was because of baseless hatred. This would seem to fall under that, right? If you're stealing from children and deaf people, I would call that baseless hatred. And I think we should promote unconditional love. So I think that that's maybe where our Gemara is going. Actually, that works nicely with the stories of the destruction of the temple and then talking about Darchei Shalom. Maybe that's the connection. Interesting. Okay. We were talking about, again, the poor Jews, the poor people, you're not allowed to steal from them. And if the poor non-Jews come and take from the charity, it's okay. The Gemara says explicitly here on Daf 61, you're supposed to visit non-Jews, you're supposed to bury non-Jews. All of this is mipnei Darchei Shalom. Again, bringing peace to the world. Okay, next Mishnah. A woman can lend the following things to someone who isn't careful about Shemitah. Here we're going to talk about relationships between a I don't want to say religious and non-religious because I don't think that that's what we're saying here, but I'll say someone who is extremely careful to follow every law and someone who was not careful about following the law. So, right, let's say you all live in the same community, and again, in those days when there are limited resources, so people share things. So can I share certain things with my neighbor who I know is not careful about certain laws, right? Whether it means purity and impurity, whether it means taking tithes, whether it means shmita, right? All of these things are very complicated because I don't want my food or my things to get, specifically food, to get mixed up, right? I want to keep my food, you can keep your food, what you do is great, but if it gets mixed up with mine, so now there's an issue. So here the Mishnah tells us, a woman can lend things to someone who isn't careful about Shemitah. She can lend her winnow, her sieve, her mill, her oven, right? You can come and cook by me and things like that, but you can't sort and grind grain together because here it says because you're helping her to sin, right? You're helping her do things with things that you're really not supposed to be eating. Again, let's say this person is eating produce on a Shemitah year, which you're not allowed to do if it was something that a Jew planted. So it's problematic. Now, here we have the wife of, again, a chaver, someone who's careful about the law, can lend the wife of an am haaretz, again, someone who's less careful about the law. So again, you can lend the winnow, the sieve, and you can select and grind grain with her. But from when she pours the water into her flour, right, to make dough, so now you can't touch her dough. Because again, because of impurity. As soon as the water touches the flour, now it can become impure. And we want to, again, the Mishnah ends with mipnei Darchei Shalom. We want everyone to live together and be happy and be nice to each other up until a point, right? You don't want your things to become impure if you're being very careful about purity. Also, you can support non-Jews during Shemitah, and you can greet non-Jews. Again, mipnei Darchei Shalom. Okay, let's go to the Gemara. The Gemara says that most amei haaretz, which again is generally translated as ignorant, but again, I'll say people who were not careful about certain laws. So here the Gemara tells us that most amei haaretz did keep maaser, did separate the tithes. Or maybe it's someone who doesn't eat with purity. Again, you don't have to eat, if you're not a Kohen, you do not have to eat with purity. You can eat even if you're impure. So the question is, what was the distinction here? The Gemara continues talking about a Kohen, right, who is suspected of eating truma while tameh, which he's not allowed to do while he's impure. You can't grind grain with him because we're suspecting that he's going to make it impure. You can give him a closed vessel to hold for a deposit, because again, we assume that if you give him a closed vessel, he's going to leave it and not touch it and give it back the way it came. Now the question is, do we need to be concerned that a person will switch out grain that was given to them, right? If I say, here's a bag of wheat, can you just hold it for me? I'll come back tomorrow and get it. Are we concerned that they're going to switch it? And then we're concerned, did they take off the tithes, trumot and masrot? What's the issue? So we're concerned, should we be concerned that they're going to switch it? So the Gemara gives a few situations where people switch things, but generally it was a mother-in-law or someone who cared about what they thought, and then they like trick them and kind of switch things up. So it seems that we should be concerned that they're going to switch it. Daf 62, you can't knead dough with the Am Haaretz, as I mentioned before, and then take off challah for him, because again, we assume that it's going to become impure. You can take the flour from him and make dough and separate challah, and then you give it back. You give the challah and you give the dough. So you're allowed to give it back. You don't have to be concerned. The same thing with olives for pressing. You can take regular olives and then you can press them and give it back. You're not allowed to take truma olives. Again, truma was separated for the Kohen. That is already more complicated. Again, all of these laws are to enable the livelihood of the kneader and the person who's pressing olives for wood, for oil. Again, we want to make sure that everybody has a livelihood. And again, you don't have to be concerned that the Amaretz is going to touch the challah or the truma in the olives. As we said, you're allowed to greet a non-Jew, an idolater. You can wish them success. You can say shalom to them, even on the day of their holiday. Again, we don't want there to be animosity between our neighbors, our Jewish neighbors, or our non-Jewish neighbors. Okay, that is the end of the 5th chapter. Let's begin the 6th chapter. So the Mishnah tells us this chapter is going to talk about an agency. In Hebrew, it's called shlichut. A shaliach is an agent. Shlichut is agency, right? We give agency to a person. We're going to talk about who can make a shaliach, an agent, what is their job, what's their role. So that's this chapter. Okay, so the Mishnah tells us that a husband, let's say a husband sends the get to his wife via a messenger, a shaliach, right? He can retract, the husband can retract the get as long as she didn't get it. Meaning, throughout the journey, it's not considered divorce, right? They're not considered divorced till she gets it in her hand. In Hebrew, this is called a shaliach leholacha. He is appointing an agent to take it to her, right? She, when she gets it, she becomes divorced. The wife can appoint a messenger to accept her get, right? This is called shaliach lekabel, to get it. Okay, so now, as soon as the agent, right, she sends an agent to get the get, as soon as the agent gets the get, they're considered divorced, right, before she even gets it, because that agent is accepting the get for her, right? So as soon as the shaliach gets the get, he cannot retract it. Okay, so it's important to understand the mechanisms of taking it versus accepting it. Okay, the Mishnah continues. The husband can say to the wife's messenger, I want you to become my messenger, right? Again, her messenger says, give it to me. I want to accept it for her. He says, no. I want you to take it to her. So here it seems that he can do this, right? Take this to my wife. And then he changes the agency. And then instead of her being divorced from when her agent gets it, it now becomes she's not divorced till she gets it, right? He changes the agency. And then the husband can retract it till the wife gets it. Or if she says, take it from me, not accept it, take it from me, right? As soon as her agent gets it, so then he can't retract it. So here it seems that there's a difference of opinion, and we're going to discuss it in the Gemara. Okay, so first of all, the Gemara says, and we did mention this before, remember we said if you say take, does it mean acquire, right? The words in the Gemara is holech, right? If I say take it, kizchi dami, is it like acquire this for her? And the Gemara says no, right? The husband makes the messenger to deliver the get, not to accept the get, but to deliver it to the wife, right? So take it doesn't mean accept it. It means take it, whereas accept it means acquire it. So that's going to be our distinction. So as I mentioned, the husband can make an agent to take it to her, and the wife can make an agent to accept it. So now the Gemara asks, because we're learning Gemara, can we do the opposite? Can the wife say, bring it to me, right? And can the husband say, accept this get for her, right? Can we flip it? So the question is, right, can they flip it? So the Gemara says that a woman can make an agent to bring it to her, right? Because we know that a woman can bring the get, right? Even the woman herself can bring the get. So that seems to imply that she can bring the get or get someone to bring it for her. The Gemara says, no, maybe it's saying, when I want you to bring it to me, she's saying, when you get there, tell the husband to make you an agent to bring it to me, right? That's like the language. What happens if there's a mix-up, meaning the wife says, accept it for me, and when the agent comes to the husband, he says, oh, the wife told me I should take it to her, right? It's different. So the Gemara says if that happens, so then even when the get gets to the wife, it's ineffective because the husband thought the agent was one type of agent, but the wife made him a different type of agent, and therefore there's too much confusion, and the get becomes ineffective. So that seems to be saying that there's a question, does the husband rely on what the agent says to him, or does he rely on what the wife meant in the first place? So here the Gemara goes back and forth, giving many different examples of a change in the agency, right? So let's say the man says that the agent should accept the get for his wife. So the Gemara says that does work. 1 second. Now you remember, we said that he can make an agent to take it, not to accept it. So how could it be that he can make an agent to accept it for his wife? So the Gemara says it works. Why? Because really he just wants to divorce his wife. So even though he said accept it for me, for her, he really meant take it to her. So it doesn't invalidate the get, and it's still effective, meaning he is sending the get, and he just wants to be divorced. Now, here we have a case of a minor, a girl, who, right, she was married, and she sends an agent, a shaliach, to accept a get for her. So she is only divorced when she gets it, because even though she is a minor, right, so she could get divorced, but she can't appoint the agent to facilitate the divorce for her, right? Even though if she was an adult, as soon as the agent got the get, she would be divorced. In this case, she's not divorced till she gets it in her hand. If she sends an agent, but he changes the agency, as I mentioned before, and the husband says, take this, just take the get. When the wife gets the get, so then it works, it's still valid. And he can retract the get till it goes to her hand, right? Even though it's different from the words of the messenger, it shows that we go according to the messenger's words. Whatever he says, that's what the husband assumes, and that's what we take as face value, and the get is effective. It's not invalid. It is valid. Let's say she says, accept it for me, and the husband says, take it, right? The husband cannot retract the get. Again, she sends someone to accept it. As soon as he accepts it, it's hers. That's it. Or maybe if he says, take it, he can retract it, because remember we said there he does have the ability to change the agency, the shlichut. So then maybe it does work. Now, again, if the husband changed the shlichut, the agency of the agent, from accepting it to taking it, so now the Gemara says, well, we're not sure really if that works. She's like kind of divorced, which means if the husband dies before she gets the get, meaning once she gets the get, it's fine, maybe, but once she gets the get, it's better. But till she gets the get, we're not sure if she's seen as divorced or not. Therefore, if the husband dies and they don't have children before she gets the get, she can only do chalitza. She cannot do yibum. If you remember from Masechet Yevamot, you have to be full-fledged married in order to do yibum. If you're not married at all, you don't do anything. So we see this is something in between where she's not married, but she is married, and therefore she does chalitza and not yibum, because it's a safek. We have a doubt whether she's married, she's divorced or not. Okay, as we said, it's a machloket if the woman can appoint an agent to accept the get from the husband's agent. Now, till now, we haven't mentioned this. Till now, we talked about one intermediary, right? Either the husband sends an agent to the wife or the wife sends an agent to the husband. But what happens if the husband sends an agent and the wife sends an agent and they meet in the middle? Is that okay? So it's a machloket if that works. What's the issue? The Gemara says maybe it's disrespectful to the husband, right? Because she can't be bothered to accept the get, so she sends, speak to my maid. She'll meet you at the corner, which seems to be disrespectful. Or maybe we're concerned that we're going to get confused with another case, which we did a while back, where again we have something very removed in order to transfer a get to a woman, right? The case was, we haven't really learned it inside yet, but there's a case that a husband, again, nowadays this is not the case, but in those days, a man could divorce his wife without her consent. So he could throw the get into her backyard, her chatzer, her property, and as soon as it lands in her property, she's seen as divorced. Don't worry, this cannot happen nowadays. Nowadays, rabbinically, a woman has to accept the divorce, but we were concerned. So now he could throw it into her house and it works. What were we concerned about? That he would like play a trick on her. What would he do? He'd put the get in his friend's backyard and then give a gift of that backyard to the woman, right? And she's like, oh, property? Great, I'll take property. And he says, oh, by the way, on your property, there's a get. Oops, right? So that does not work because obviously it's tricking. So that does not work. So here the Gemara says maybe this case of a double agent, oh, that's funny, but two agents does not work. It does not work, right? Again, because it seems like similar to this, right? Because nobody's seeing the other person. So the Gemara is not sure. It's a machloket if it works or not. Okay, let's say a man sent an agent with the get to the wife, and then he gets to the wife, and she says, do me a favor, I don't know, my hands are dirty. Can you accept the get for me, right? So what is she doing? She's flipping the agency, right? He was the one who was supposed to give it, but now she wants him to be the one who accepts it. So can he accept it from himself for her? Right? So, right, is she divorced or not? As you can imagine, it is unclear. We're not sure. And therefore, again, the same case. She does chalitza if the husband dies, meaning it's this ambiguous case that we're not sure about. Maybe she then needs another get to divorce her, and it does not work at all. Okay, since we're talking about agents, let's say agents wrote the wrong name on a get, right? A man says, I want you to write a get for my wife, Sprinzy, and they write, Shifra, right? It sounded the same, and they wrote the wrong name. So now, can they rewrite the get, right? Do we say he wanted a valid get, they didn't make a valid get, so they didn't do their agency? Or do we say, no, he told them to write it, they made a mistake, that's it, they're finished with their job, they did the wrong job, but they're finished, and if he wants a new get written, he needs to get a new agent to do it, or tell them again, but it's not clear if their agency was fulfilled or not. Okay, next Mishnah. A woman told an agent to accept the get for her. She needs to have two sets of witnesses. One group that testifies that she appointed the agent, and another group, again, group means two witnesses, and another group to say that the agent accepted the get for her. And then he tore it up. We'll see why in a minute. The Gemara says on Daf 64 the Mishnah says that it can even be the same two witnesses. It doesn't have to be different witnesses. It could be the same witnesses, and it can even be one from each group can be the new group. It doesn't matter, but we need to have two witnesses that saw the first part and two witnesses that saw the second part. So now the Gemara explains. The husband says he gave a get to a third party to hold on to. And then the third party says, you gave me the get in order to divorce your wife, right? You gave it to me to give it to her, right? So then who do we believe? So the Gemara says we believe the husband, right? Because he said he's the one who gave the get. So we believe him to say, did you mean to divorce her or didn't you mean to divorce her? Or another opinion is we believe the third party. So the Gemara explains, we believe the husband because if he wanted to divorce her, he could have given it to her directly. The fact that he gives it to this third party could mean that he just wanted him to hold on to it. Or we believe the third party because the husband trusted him with the get in the first place. So if you trust the guy, why would he now lie? So here the Gemara talks about like a litigant. If a litigant admits to something, it's like having 100 witnesses, right? So that would be the husband. Or we believe the third party because, again, in monetary ideas, they trusted him in the first place, and therefore we should believe that third party. Why don't we believe the agent to say that the agent did what he was supposed to do, right? Again, it's like the third party. Why do we need these witnesses? The Gemara says it's because we don't have the get anymore. Now, why don't we have the get anymore? So it's describing a time when there was a persecution of the Jews and you weren't allowed to have a get. Again, that was one of the persecutions was you couldn't have a bill of divorce, which they knew was what made the divorce. And therefore you would write a get and you'd burn it up, right? Or tear it up right away. Because we don't have it, now we really have to discuss who do we believe and who we don't believe. So if the wife says that this third party told me that he got the get, so we believe her, or we believe her to say, my husband gave the get to the third person in front of me, right? So that is when we believe her, but the other case, we don't believe her. Let's say again, that third party and the husband say that they gave and got the get, and she says, I got it, but it's lost. So we don't believe her. But now the Gemara says, why don't we believe any of, like everyone is agreeing, like, why don't we believe them? And it goes through each one, why we don't believe each one. Again, we don't have the document in our hands. The last Mishnah for today is talking about a Na'ara Me'urasa, which means a young maiden, which is Na'ara, right? We have three stages for a woman. Ktana means a minor, under 12. Ne'ara means between 12 and 12 and a half. So, what we would call emerging adult. And then we have bogeret, an adult is over 12 and a half. So interesting, nowadays we say emerging adulthood goes into the 30s. So we can understand the distinction from nowadays to then. But here it says that we have a na'ara, so she's a maiden between 12 and 12 and a half. Her father or she herself can accept her get, or another opinion is only the father can accept it. Right, and so that's one thing. The Mishnah then says, if the person, meaning the child, the woman, cannot save the get, meaning she's too young, she's a child. If she can't save the get, she can't accept it. Meaning, if you understand how to save something, you can accept it, you can acquire it. So we're going back to the beginning of today's shiur, right? How old do you need to be in order to acquire something? So the Gemara is going to discuss. So when the father can accept it, so then, right, if he can accept it for his child, so then she shouldn't have the right to accept it, meaning it's either or. Either she accepts it or he can accept it. So now the question is minor, can she accept it or not? So the Gemara says, if she can tell the difference between her get and something else, right, if she's not like, ooh, shiny piece of paper, maybe let me eat it, right? That means she's too young to accept the get. But if she knows how to, line up all her dolls or keep things in a safe place, so then she can accept it. And I thought this was great for anybody who's, has had children or learns child development. So the Gemara tells us, right, if a child is given a rock and throws it on the floor, but the child is given a nut and he keeps it, right? Nut equals like marshmallow in the time of the Gemara, right? So if they get something that's yummy and they keep it, so then that child is old enough to acquire something, right? Which means, right, if you give it to them, you can't take it away, right? Because they understand the difference between a rock and a nut, right? Food versus like my grandchild at this point will eat anything. That's too young. He cannot acquire something. So that child is old enough to acquire things for himself, but not for other people. But, right, because he's still throwing the rocks, right? But if he gets an object and then you say, oh, can I have that back? And the child gives it back, like he understands taking and giving. So then they can acquire things for themselves and for other people. And I just think it's just beautiful to really see, and I say this all the time, really how advanced the sages of the Gemara were in terms of understanding, right? Child development, the idea of object permanence, the idea of really seeing different stages. Again, I don't think that maybe the ages will correspond to the ages that we have nowadays, but it is interesting to understand that those concepts exist even 1,500 years ago. So I just think that's fascinating. And with that, we will end. I just want to say next week, even though I would teach on Wednesday night, but Wednesday night is Tisha B'Av, so we're going to be learning on Tuesday night. So again, I'm so sorry for all the changes. I thank you for your flexibility. So we will be learning next week, Bezrat Hashem, Tuesday night, 9 o'clock regular time. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom, Chodesh Tov, for those of you who are still in Rosh Chodesh. And I will see you next week. Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you. Bye-bye.